one piece that was dropped was staking, of course. That was removed from the applications earlier on. I wonder, reasonings for that and whether or not any of that could change.
There were features of the product that some people would have liked to see included but weren't, and those are always open for reconsideration as far as I'm concerned.
Today's show is brought to you by Mezzo, a new home for Bitcoin holders to cultivate Bitcoin and grow wealth together. Use your BTC on Mezzo to unlock real utility and honest yield. Join Bitcoin's first open source economic layer today. All right, back on Coinage with us, SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce. Hester Peirce, so good to see you again.
Zach, it's great to be back. I want to, of course, give my disclaimer, which is that my views are my own views as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Yes, and it is also why we love having you on, because hearing your views, I think, makes us all smarter, not just, in the world of crypto, but markets in general. And I want to kick things off with what we're seeing play out right now, because I think a lot of people are excited about these ETH ETFs coming to market. It would seem like potentially even next week is when people are expecting these things to trade. But I'm curious for a little bit of a peek behind the scenes this time, Commissioner Peirce, because there wasn't a full commission vote. A lot of people said there were some political wins that eventually got these things over the finish line. Maybe you could tell us what actually happened with the approvals this time.
Yeah, well, it's not so unusual that there wasn't a commission vote. A lot of these kinds of ETP approvals happen at the delegated level, meaning we delegate authority to the staff and the staff can just approve them without having a formal commission vote. But I don't think it was that strange that it happened, because we had the Bitcoin exchange traded products. We had been told by the court that we had to move forward. And that was what happened. And then applying that same logic, we really didn't have much choice on the ETH ETPs.
Yeah, and last time we had you on, you said it was your hope that we wouldn't have to see a court battle between the SEC and the issuers to get there. Your hope was realized. You were right. Now, though, as we wait to see these things go live and start trading, I'm curious if there's anything that you expect to be different this time relative to the Bitcoin ETFs.
I mean, I think the Bitcoin ETPs were really unusual in the sense that there was so much buildup after all of those years and all of those different folks trying to come in and get one approved. And then finally, they were all going to go live, and everyone knew they were going to go live at the same time. And there was just so much anticipation built around it. And while there has been anticipation around the ETH ETPs as well, we saw this sort of iterative process whereby, they were approved on the trading and market side, and then they still had to go through the Corp Fin process, which is what's happening now. And so it's a much more, I think, calmer atmosphere around the ETH ETPs. And I think that's really the distinction. And really, we shouldn't strive to have drama around the launch of products like this. It should just be, they go to trade and we'll see whether people want to buy them or not. And that, that should be how it plays out.
Well, one piece that was dropped was staking, of course. That was removed from the applications earlier on. I wonder, reasonings for that and whether or not any of that could change as we see these progress in the life of them being out there as products.
I mean, I can't speak to what went on in that process between the staff and the issuers around whether staking was in or out. But I think certainly something like staking is, or any feature of the product we saw that on the Bitcoin exchange traded products too, right? There were features of the product that some people would have liked to see included but weren't. And those are always open for reconsideration as far as I'm concerned.
Well, one thing that I think it was interesting when we had you on last time back in January, talking about the differences and similarities between the Bitcoin products getting approved and what seemed like the Ethereum products eventually getting approved, was the fact that both of them did have established futures markets, and the idea of being able to look at kind of how these underlying products traded. Now you've got two applications for Solana ETFs from Van Eck and 21 Shares, and again, not speaking to any one application specifically, but some people are kind of saying maybe you don't need CME futures existing for a cryptocurrency for them to be approved. I'd be curious to get your take on that, if there is an alternate path without those existing.
Well, I'm a little hesitant to comment on those applications because they're out in front of us. I really can't comment on them. I can say that, we have to look at the facts and circumstances, and what people need to do is they need to take prior precedent with ETPs, and not just crypto ETPs, but with other kinds of ETPs, and make the case that they can be approved under under our existing laws and rules. And so we really have to look at that on a case by case basis. It's this environment with crypto is so difficult, of course, because there are questions around what my colleagues and I are going to think is a security and not. There are all these kinds of questions, but again, we really should just take the existing precedent and apply it to whatever the facts and circumstances are.
Well, it seems like, I don't know, just to push a little bit more there, the existing precedents seem to be so tied, at least when you read through the application's approvals from the SEC, it seems like so much of it was tied to kind of the market specifics of the futures market for Bitcoin and Ethereum to get those approvals. So I don't know if you would say that you don't necessarily need those to see a Solana ETF eventually approved.
I mean, again, I think people need to look and see whether there have been other types of markets, other types of products where there hasn't been a futures market underlying it, and then they can make the case based on that.
Yeah, there certainly have been commodity ETFs that don't have futures markets that have been approved. I think that might be one example to maybe point to. And of course, obviously, all of this happening in real time. To shift maybe to what Congress has been doing too around the idea of security versus commodity. I wanted to get your opinion on what we're seeing play out right now in Congress, because, I don't know if many people predicted that we would see regulatory clarity or efforts in Congress come to life at this point in the year. But one of those was the bipartisan push to repeal the Staff Accounting Bulletin 121, SOB 121. President Biden, of course, vetoed it. But now it seems like there are some large banks that have gotten a green light to kind of work around that rule and begin custodying digital assets. Some people aren't exactly very happy with that because it seems like a special carve out. I'm curious kind of what the new thinking around SOB 121 is at the SEC and how that maybe looks moving forward.
Well, I think that the process has been just terrible around SAB 121. The process for putting it out was terrible. It was a major, effectively, to me, looked like a rulemaking at the time, and it could have been done with input from the public, query whether it would have made sense maybe for FASB to be considering the issue instead of us. But in any event, we should have had a public comment period around it. We didn't. The attempt to overturn it didn't work. But even before that attempt to overturn it, there were expansions of SAB 121. And initially, it was really about public companies, and then it started applying to broker dealers, and then there's all this guidance that's being provided orally around what broker dealers can and can't do. And now we hear about other kinds of accommodations or changes being made, and it's all being done in a very non-transparent way. I don't understand how that is beneficial for people. We have process for a reason, and we should be following process for SAB 121. It's been a very disappointing area for me, and I think we could do better, and I think we should do better. So again, I really don't like having things done developed in sort of negotiations that are behind the scenes, and I feel that's what I see happening here.
If there is maybe one good thing now, regardless of the way that it all played out, you could have more custody options, I suppose, if these rules are changed. Is that maybe one thing that people should, regardless of what happened, feel maybe better about?
Well, certainly, one of the reasons that I have really been opposed to SAB 121 is because it has taken this position that we don't want to have experienced players custodying crypto, which seems to me a very strange and non-investor protection oriented position. So I'm open to and happy to see developments that allow more people to come in and participate in the custody space. But again, it should be done in an orderly way. I think the end goal of having parties engaging in crypto that have experience from other parts of the world that they can bring into crypto, that's generally a good thing. Unfortunately, too often, whether it's here at the SEC or in other places in government, you see government trying to drive players out who would be interested in participating, but they're not welcomed in. And so, yes, that is a potentially positive development. I would like to see more participants in custodying crypto.
There's another bill that's already passed the House, Fit 21. A lot of people are looking at that and optimistic that, again, maybe Congress can draw some lines in what is allowed and what's not allowed when it comes to crypto here in the U.S. And I don't know, maybe you'd see it the same way. When I look at it, it seems like some ideas maybe borrowed from what you've floated in the past, including kind of, safe harbor as projects launch and grow. I'm curious, are there parts of the regulatory direction now that you're seeing play out that has you particularly proud, or perhaps on the other side, worried of kind of where we're headed?
Well, proud in the sense, I think it's great that Congress has devoted some time to thinking about these very difficult issues and issues that we could have taken a more positive stand on in the regulatory sphere, and Congress has come in to try to provide some guidance. And so I think that's something that's a positive step for the United States, is just having a real conversation around these issues and trying to get to the right place. But I think regulatorily, we're still not in a great place because we're still driving policy through enforcement. And that isn't the way that policy should be driven. It should be thinking about what a regulatory framework should be and then working from there, and then using enforcement, of course, to address fraud, but then to back up whatever regulatory framework you have in place.
Well, I think it's a good segue into something that I noticed you recently write about as well, which is the Bank of England floating this idea of a sandbox, and you pointing out that there could be something to be doing here in the U.S. when it comes to a similar sandbox of cross-border payments and tokenization on the blockchain. Why was that particularly important for you to write, to put out there, and invite more experimentation when it comes to maybe leaning into tokenization?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple reasons for weighing in there. One is, I think it's interesting to see what other countries are doing on this front, and attempts by other countries really to build environments within which people can experiment. And so I was looking at that as an opportunity for us to plug into that and say, hey, why don't we try to do something that does allow people to try things in different jurisdictions? I think that only strengthens the experiment. It means that the regulators on both sides of the Atlantic could get more information about how the experiment is working in different conditions, and I think that could be valuable. UK and US are a natural pair because we have so many interactions already and so many commonalities in the way our markets work, and so many common players. So that seemed to make sense. But I think the idea was that we too, in the US, as you said, would develop a sandbox. It would not be limited just to crypto activities. It could cover other kinds of activities, but the idea is it would be a micro innovation sandbox that would allow people to come in and say, I want to try a limited experiment, limited in the number of participants, customers, and in the dollars. But you could try what you wanted to try on a set of conditions that you establish. And you could take the same set of conditions you were using in the UK if you were participating in that sandbox, or you could come up with a set of conditions that you make up yourself, and you come into the SEC, you do a notice filing, you say this is what we're going to do, and then you can go ahead and do it. You don't have to wait for the go ahead from the SEC. And the reason that's important to me is that too often what I've heard in the years that I've been here is that people come in really wanting to engage with the SEC, and they end up in this years-long protracted process where they're sort of stymied because they can't move forward because they're not getting the official go-ahead from the SEC, and their funding's running out, and they're feeling very trapped. And so this would be a way to say to the SEC, people are going to be trying these experiments. Now you start, really to the staff at the SEC to say, now you have the permission to work with these people who are doing these experiments.
Hmm.
to try to develop long-term conditions that would make sense for whatever they're trying to do. Again, I should emphasize this is just my idea. It's not operational yet, but I think it's the
Sure.
kind of idea that could really change the ability of people to move forward with things in the US.
Well, I mean, speaking for myself, I think it's a good idea, and one that I think would invite, as you said, a change among crypto entrepreneurs or just people trying to experiment here in the U.S. Maybe feel a little bit more invited along in the process. And it's maybe something that you and we didn't really get to talk about last time, is maybe a culture change, and maybe only because it's recent, or at least it would appear recent, within the walls of the SEC. One thing that our community has noticed. Shout out to Jeff who posed this question. A significant number of cases, or I should say investigations from the SEC into crypto companies being dropped, including Paxos, Stacks, Consensus. Some people are wondering if that's indicative of maybe a culture shift happening within the SEC right now to maybe step back from pursuing that original path, as you said, of a lot of enforcement actions.
Well, I mean, each case has to be looked at, each termination of a case has to be looked at on its own facts and circumstances. But if I were designing a culture shift at the SEC, and again, I really want to emphasize that the problem comes from the commission at the SEC. There are a lot of staff who are really interested in working with people, but they've got to get the go ahead from the commission. But if I were designing a culture change at the SEC, what I would say is you've got to do more than just drop some cases. You really have to come out with a proactive agenda for working with people and with some proactive guidance about what is okay and what is not okay. Because a lot of the problems that arise are from the uncertainty around, am I going to face an enforcement inquiry? How many dollars am I going to have to spend on lawyers to deal with that inquiry? Is there a route that I can go in and actually talk to people about what registration might look like, or maybe even talk to people about whether the activity that I'm engaged in really doesn't even touch on the SEC at all,
Mm-hmm.
on the SEC jurisdiction at all. And so I think a culture change would really require some more proactive steps than what I've seen so far.
Well, I wonder if internally, and again, I don't know how much you can speak to this, but there were a few notable departures after the debt box case in particular, for which the SEC apologized in misrepresenting facts in that case. David Hirsch, the SEC's crypto enforcer, crypto asset unit and division of enforcement, stepped down not too long after that all happened. I'm not saying those are connected at all, but you have been pretty critical of the way that some of those cases have been pursued. So I do wonder if maybe this time around that we're getting to chat with you, if it seems at all, if things internally are really changing.
Again, I mean, I think you really have to look at the commission and what the commission is saying and doing, and not necessarily at staff changes. I mean, people come and go on the staff all the time for lots of different reasons. It's very common for people to spend some part of their career at the SEC and then move on and do other things. And reading too much into those kinds of things, I think, doesn't make a lot of sense. What really I think people need to be paying attention to is what is the commission saying, and is the commission doing things that are proactively intended to say, we're not going to ever weigh in on the merits of a technology or of any particular assets, but we do want to give people the freedom to know that they can try things and work with us. And that's why, again, I'm not the micro innovation sandbox. I'd welcome people's feedback on that, and I'm not saying that's the end all and be all, but I think ideas like that will allow the productive dialogue to happen are what really would signal a more positive approach. And something that I've complained about a lot in the past is really our unwillingness to sit down and think clearly and lay out our thinking clearly about where the securities laws are triggered and where they are not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conversation that we should be having in a way that's not designed to obfuscate, but designed to clarify to people. And I haven't seen that kind of conversation happening yet. I hope that it does, and I'm always hoping that we will get up one day and say, hey, you know what we were trying before didn't work. We're going to try something new. So I'm optimistic that we can change that, but I just haven't seen that massive change yet to the degree that I would like to see it.
Yeah, but it hasn't stopped you from working and charging ahead. And I know that I speak for a lot of people in this industry in applauding those efforts, regardless of whether or not we've seen any changes to the degree that you want. But I do want to ask you, just kind of as we approach this election, I'm feeling quite reflective. I'm sure the nation is. I don't know if you are, though, in terms of kind of the efforts or things that have happened at the SEC, maybe since the collapse of FTX. I'm curious to get your take. If you think that the SEC has made inroads, progress to actually make the industry safer for investors since that collapse, and if so, in what ways maybe would you celebrate looking back?
Well, I think certainly our presence in some of these cases where there have been bad actors has been very positive, and I do think um, that has made a difference. I underscore, though, that the industry should be doing a lot of, well, you said, you're reflective on things. I think the industry should be doing a lot of self-reflection always, and asking what can be done without government's involvement to stop some of these bad actors. I mean, really, responsibility first lies within the industry, and the SEC does have a role to play, but don't always come running to the SEC to solve problems that you could solve yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think that's kind of, the Coinage experiment began with a very close look, an exclusive look at the Terra collapse. And just a little bit ago, we saw all that play out in a case against the SEC. So it is somewhat full circle and reflective, which plays into my last question for you, Hester Peirce, Commissioner Peirce. Last time we had you on, I couldn't get you to say whether you wanted to be chair of the SEC. So I'm going to ask a different question, which is more targeted at if you were to become the chair of the SEC, what would be your highest priority?
Well, look, I mean, I think it doesn't matter so much who is sitting in the chair seat as whether or not we have this kind of culture change that you and I were just talking about. And so I think a piece of what needs to be done when an opportunity comes to have a change is, let's look for proactive ways to engage. Let's look for ways that allow people to push forward with trying new things. I mean, crypto is obviously only one piece of what we do at the agency, but I think there's a bigger issue at the agency around innovation, and that's something that whoever is sitting in the chair seat really needs to think about, because the reason that our industry that we regulate has been successful for so many years is because there's a dynamism. New players come in, players that you thought might have lasted forever end up not lasting and being replaced by someone new. That dynamism is very healthy. And so I think in order to have a healthy industry, you need to be looking at the rule book and saying, what is standing in the way of us having new people with new ideas coming in to challenge the incumbents and to say, hey, maybe there's a better way of doing something, keeping the incumbents on their toes. And that's a very healthy process. So I think that has to be at the basis of anything that anyone sitting in the chair's seat is thinking about, is keeping that dynamism there, making sure we don't set up regulatory barriers to entry, making sure that while we achieve investor protection, we also aren't thinking about investor protection in terms of putting airbags around everything that investors do, but allowing investors to make their own decisions for themselves. That's something that's always been very important to me, and I think sometimes we as regulators lose the magic. We miss the magic of the ability of people to make their own decisions. That is, again, part of the dynamism that underlies the whole country. Is our view that individuals really can make good choices for themselves.
Well, as an entrepreneur who's trying to build a different way in media, and someone who used to work at some of the traditional media giants, Yahoo Finance and CNBC, I can't tell you how much it means for you to keep coming on with us at Coinage. I'm always kind of a little confused as to why you do, and all these other big guests I used to talk to or interview don't really necessarily still hit me up. But I gotta say, it has meant a lot that you keep coming back on here to answer some of these crypto questions. So thank you again, Commissioner Peirce, for making the time and chatting with us today.
Well, thanks, Zach. I always enjoy our conversations.